It's quite something, isn't it? The idea that your closest allies, well, they might be listening in. And now we have this news. Denmark is calling in the acting head of the U.S. Embassy, all because of allegations about U.S. spying. In Greenland, no less, and Copenhagen, too. It really makes you think. International relations are rarely straightforward.
No, they certainly aren't. And this is exactly the kind of thing we need to unpack. For you, the listener, especially if you're tracking global politics, maybe for exams like the UPSC or just to stay informed, this is a really crucial case study. It shows you the messiness of geopolitics, how fragile alliances can sometimes be.
Absolutely. So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to really get into it. We'll look at these specific U.S. allegations, Denmark's reaction, which seems pretty strong, and then zoom out. Put it in the bigger picture, how nations deal with each other, even supposed friends. We're drawing on insights from the conversation today.
Right. We'll cover what the U.S. is actually accused of doing, how Denmark's pushing back.
Yeah.
And look at other cases, too, like that situation with Hungary, maybe even China. Plus, this idea of regulation by revelation, what happens when spying gets exposed. And, of course, technology's role in all this, and what it means for global trust overall.
Okay, let's start right there in Greenland. What are the specific claims that have got Denmark so worked up?
Well, the core allegation is that U.S. intelligence agencies were specifically told to gather info on Greenland. We're talking about Greenlandic politicians, people involved in the independence movement, and importantly, their mining interests, their natural resources.
Mining interests. Huh. That sounds very targeted. Any idea why? What's the suspected motive?
The suspicion, as it's being reported, is that this intel was meant to give the U.S. leverage. Leverage, maybe, if an opportunity came up to buy Greenland or pressure them into some kind of transfer.
Which, of course, reminds everyone of former President Trump's very public offer to buy Greenland a few years back. Seemed a bit strange then, but maybe looks a bit different now.
It certainly casts it in a new light, doesn't it? Makes you reconsider the context.
So how has Denmark reacted officially?
The reaction's been pretty clear. Surprise and serious concern. Their foreign minister, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, didn't really hide his surprise, even seemed a bit emotional talking about it. And like you said, calling in the U.S. Embassy official, that's not something you do lightly. It's a strong diplomatic signal.
Sends a message, definitely. And the U.S., what are they saying?
Well, interestingly, the State Department hasn't really commented directly on the spying allegations themselves, not publicly anyway. What they have done, or rather what the Director of National Intelligence has done, is launch an investigation into the leaks. So the focus seems to be on how this classified info got out, not necessarily on the spying itself.
Which probably doesn't reassure Denmark much.
Unlikely. From the Danish perspective, it must feel like a major ally, a NATO partner, has potentially undermined their sovereignty. It hits close to home.
That feeling of being undermined within NATO, of all places, that must be deeply worrying for them. Suggests a real crack in the usual partnership rules. And the sources mentioned this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? Relations between Denmark and the U.S. have been a bit chilly lately.
Yes, that's mentioned, a sort of backdrop of, let's say, frostier relations. Things like a controversial visit by a U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, apparently, and even some consumer boycotts of U.S. goods in Denmark. So this alleged spying might be, a symptom of wider tensions, not just a one-off thing.
Okay, so the Denmark situation really highlights potential problems within NATO, but it's not the only example of allies allegedly spying on each other, is it? The sources mention Hungary and Ukraine, too.
That's another really tricky one. Hungary, an EU and NATO member, is accused of running a spy ring inside Ukraine, apparently collecting military secrets for Russia. Now, Hungary strongly denies this, calls it propaganda.
But the political context is crucial there, isn't it? Prime Minister Orban's government, well, they're theoretically aligned with Ukraine through the EU and NATO, but Orban himself has often seemed quite pro-Russian, blocking EU aid to Ukraine, for example. It creates this inherent tension.
Exactly. And think about the implications for trust, especially within the EU. If fellow members suspect Hungary is sharing intelligence with Russia, that's a massive problem. It raises serious questions about security cooperation, about the unity of the bloc, shows how national stances can really divide these groups.
And it goes beyond just Western alliances. The sources even mention North Korea apparently spying on China.
Right, and that's a key point. It shows this isn't just about traditional adversaries or Cold War blocs. Even countries considered, somewhat aligned or at least not openly hostile, they still spy on each other. It suggests a baseline level of suspicion, maybe a fundamental lack of complete trust is just the reality of international relations.
So these revelations, especially the US and Hungary ones, make you wonder how these things are usually kept in check, if at all. The sources talk about regulation by revelation. Can you break that down?
Sure. It's a concept from an intelligence historian, Richard Aldrich. And the basic idea is that intelligence operations against allies often only get stopped, or at least curtailed, when they're exposed publicly. It's the scandal, the public fallout, the diplomatic headache that's the main regulator, more so than internal rules.
So it's the fear of getting caught and the embarrassment that follows, rather than, say, strict internal policies or ethics.
That's the argument, essentially. Aldrich points out that when these scandals break, the consequences are often, well, fairly limited. You might get some public condemnation, maybe a promise not to do it again, perhaps some minor changes in procedure, but often not much more.
But the source also suggests the Greenland case might play out differently, especially considering the previous U.S. administration's style.
Yes, that's an important point they raise. The article notes that the Trump administration often seemed, shall we say, less bothered by traditional political or media pressure. So the usual regulation by revelation playbook might not apply quite so neatly here. Will exposure actually change behavior? It's uncertain. The piece even floats the idea that maybe a hit to international stock market confidence could be a bigger check, but even that's not guaranteed.
It feels like this kind of behavior could really strain international law. That whole system relies on nations acting, appropriately, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The sources highlight this. Both international law and even things like the U.S. Constitution kind of assume actors will play within certain bounds. When a major power seems to ignore those norms, it puts pressure on the whole system. And it might make other countries think, well, maybe we can't rely on goodwill, even from allies. They might feel they need to boost their own spying capabilities just to keep tabs.
And the article even suggests intelligence itself could become more like tariffs or trade disputes, another tool, another weapon almost, in foreign policy, creating more uncertainty.
That's a concerning thought, isn't it? Imagine negotiations where the hidden threat of espionage is always there, always a factor. It would just add another layer of complexity, another reason for mistrust.
Let's shift gears slightly. Technology. The sources really stress how much tech is changing the spying game.
Oh, massively. Technology has made spying so much easier, cheaper, and just more widespread. Think about communications intercepts, much easier now. Satellite images are everywhere, high-res stuff, and just analyzing open source data, news reports, social media databases, you can learn a lot.
And it's not just gathering the data, it's making sense of it all, right?
Exactly. Machine learning, massive computing power, huge data storage. Agencies can now process incredible amounts of information, find patterns, get insights that were just impossible before. And the article suggests this ease of collection fuels a constant demand for more intelligence, even on allies, even in peacetime, just wanting to know what leaders are thinking, what the public mood is.
It's almost like we can spy easily, so we do spy. But ethics, diplomacy, where do those fit in? And the sources link this more aggressive spying to global instability, too.
That's the other side of the coin. In a world that feels more unstable, more unpredictable, with potential conflicts looming, intelligence becomes even more critical for defense. Nations feel they need to know about potential flashpoints, who might do what military capabilities exist, what the consequences might be. This info feeds directly into decisions about buying weapons, stockpiling resources, deploying troops. Intelligence is fundamentally a tool of statecraft. It's about avoiding nasty surprises, but also sometimes about creating opportunities for yourself.
And this isn't entirely new ground, is it? Allies spying on allies has happened before.
Oh, absolutely. History is full of it. The sources mentioned the crypto AG case during the Cold War. The U.S. secretly bought this Swiss company that sold encryption devices worldwide, including to allies. But the U.S. had weakened the encryption so they could read supposedly secure messages for years. And the article suggests those kinds of historical practices sort of paved the way for the massive surveillance we see today, like from the NSA.
Okay, so pulling all this together, the Greenland situation, Hungary, the tech, the history, what does it all mean for the world order right now?
Well, the picture emerging seems to be one of growing complexity and, frankly, eroding trust. You see countries like Denmark caught in a difficult spot balancing NATO commitments with defending their own territory, like Greenland from alleged spying by an ally. You see the EU potentially worried about Hungary sharing secrets with Russia, which could weaken the whole bloc from within. The big takeaway seems to be that alliances are becoming, well, less reliable. Or at least trust isn't automatic. It feels like a significant shift in global politics. And these spying revelations are probably just symptoms of that bigger change.
So the key thing for you, the listener, and especially if you're trying to get a deep understanding for something like the UPSC exams, is that these aren't just isolated incidents. They signal this wider trend. Growing distrust, shifting power dynamics, all fueled by technology and global uncertainty. Understanding these undercurrents is crucial for analyzing what's happening now and what might happen next.
Which really leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? If spying among allies becomes easier and more common, how does that fundamentally change alliances? How long can they last? What does it mean for global security if that basic layer of trust keeps wearing away?
Definitely some important things to mull over. If you found this deep dive useful for understanding these complex global dynamics, please do like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment. Let us know your thoughts or any further questions you might have. Remember, this deep dive drew on information and analysis from the conversation.